Today, I want to share with you a story full of emotions and surprises. It is the story of a mother who had to face great challenges in life when her ex-partner tried to take her to court to fight for custody of their child. But then, in a miraculous moment, her son handed her a letter, and everything changed. Could this letter change their fate? This story is not only about a legal battle, but also about unconditional love and the unexpected things that life brings. I stood in the courtroom, trying not to cry as my ex's lawyer tore into me with cold, cruel accusations in front of the judge. She's bankrupt. She doesn't even have money to buy a decent house or proper meals for the kids. Even their clothes are torn. She sneered and looked at me as if I were a complete failure. So, why should she have custody of them? I clenched my teeth, staying silent. My hands were shaking, but I knew that if I showed any sign of weakness, they would use it as a reason to take my children away from me. The judge nodded slowly, as if agreeing with the other side. The air seemed to drain from my lungs. All I could think about were Luca and Arya. What would happen if they were handed over to a man who cared more about controlling everything than truly loving his children? I couldn't afford a lawyer like he could. In fact, I barely had anything left. But I was still here. I had come, stood firm, and did everything I could for my children. Just when I felt myself slipping into a quiet panic, the kind where your body is numb, but your thoughts are screaming in your head, my 7-year-old son, Luca, suddenly stood up. "Mom," his voice echoed across the room. "Can I give you the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" The whole room froze. Everyone turned to look. Derek, my ex, was paralyzed. His lawyer blinked rapidly, as if slapped. Even the judge stopped speaking. I had no idea which letter Luca was talking about. My heart raced. He had never mentioned it before. But I nodded. And as he walked towards the judge's bench with the folded paper in his small hand, I knew everything had changed. I wasn't always the shy woman in the courtroom like this. There was a time when I was a confident woman. I had a job I loved, good friends, and beautiful dreams. But everything started to change when I fell in love with Derek. He used to be charming, generous, always knowing how to make me trust him. He told me I didn't need to work, that I should stay home and take care of the kids while he handled the finances. "You've done enough. You deserve to rest," he would say. I didn't realize at the time what I was giving up. I gave up my independence, my voice, and even my safety net. I became invisible in my own life. After my daughter Arya was born, Derek changed. He became irritable, critical. Every penny I spent was scrutinized. If I bought diapers without comparing prices, I would be ignored all day. If I mentioned going back to work, he would laugh dismissively. "We don't need you to make money. We need you to be a good mother." Then one day, he left. Took everything. Closed our joint accounts, moved in with someone new, hired a lawyer, and I had nothing except for the kids. I stood in line for 2 hours at the free legal advice office just to be guided on how to represent myself in court. I carried a thick stack of documents, bills, my kids' attendance sheets, and pictures of them eating instant noodles off paper towels. Because we didn't have clean dishes, we lived in a tiny apartment. I worked 2 hourly cleaning jobs just to scrape together enough to pay the rent. No cable, no internet. I used a pay-as-you-go phone, always terrified that if the school called in an emergency, I wouldn't get the message. There were nights when I hand-washed clothes in the bathtub with water boiled on the stove. Luca never complained. Arya still hummed as I scrubbed her socks. I didn't tell anyone how bad things were, not even my mom, who had warned me about Derek. He sees people as investments, she had said. But I didn't listen. The day of the trial, I was so scared I felt like running away. Derek wanted full custody. He said I was unstable, poor, and incapable of taking care of the kids. His lawyer presented detailed lists of assets, homes, and cars. The suits they wore gleamed as if victory was assured. I, on the other hand, walked in with a borrowed dress, an old coat, and a plastic folder containing all I had: attendance sheets, letters from teachers, and confirmation from my landlord that I always paid on time. I knew it might not be enough, but I had to try. For Luca. For Arya. That morning, Luca held my hand as we stepped up the courthouse steps. "Mom, will everything be okay?" he asked. I smiled. "It'll be okay, sweetheart. Everything will be fine." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything, except the love I had for those two kids. I knew what it felt like to have nothing but still do everything for your children. I knew what it felt like to cry silently in the bathroom so they wouldn't see. I knew what it felt like to try to protect their little world while everything around you was falling apart. In the courtroom, I sat up straight, silent. I listened as they spoke of everything I didn't have: money, stable housing, transportation. They say my son wears shoes with holes. They say my daughter sometimes goes to school without breakfast. But they didn't understand. This wasn't neglect. This was poverty. And poverty is not a crime. It's just a crack in the system. And then Luca stood up, holding the letter, this piece of paper that silenced the room, reversed the trial, and changed our lives forever. I want to ask, where were you when I skipped dinner to make sure there was enough cereal for the kids? Where were you when I sold my wedding ring to buy coats for the winter? But I stayed silent. I learned that in court, anger doesn't look like strength. It only makes people see you as unstable. The judge nodded slowly, as if every accusation made sense. My heart sank. Just when I thought I wouldn't be able to survive the rest of the hearing, I felt a gentle tug on my sleeve. It was Luca, my sweet and brave child. He looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I say something to the judge?" The courtroom felt colder when Derek's lawyer began presenting her case. Carlene walked with confidence, as if she had done this hundreds of times and always won. She stood tall, her voice clear, loud, and sharp as she recounted her version of my life, a version stripped of truth, a version meant to humiliate. She doesn't have a stable job. She receives inconsistent financial support. Her apartment is just temporary housing. The children deserve better than a mother who can barely feed them. I didn't look at Derek. I didn't need to. I could imagine his face, empty, calm, as if it had nothing to do with him, as if my financial collapse wasn't his doing. He was the one who drained our joint account just days before leaving. He was the one who refused to pay the bills, unless it made him look good in front of his parents. But in this room, none of that mattered. Before the judge, there were only spreadsheets and photos provided by Derek's side, a clean house, a full fridge, brochures promoting private schools. Carlene flipped through the documents as if it were routine, then held up my bank statements like they were dirty laundry. "Your Honor," she said, "as you can see, my client provides a stable and safe environment. The children have their own rooms, regular meals, a nanny. Meanwhile, Ms. Morrow has no verifiable income, no employer references. She was warned for late rent payments. This is not a safe environment for two young children. My face burned with shame. She didn't mention that I had taken every job I could, often cleaning houses for cash, because I couldn't get a proper job without childcare. She didn't talk about how I had sold almost everything of value just to keep food in the house. She didn't mention that I paid the rent just days after the warning. The judge didn't react immediately. He leaned back, looking at the papers as if they confirmed what he had believed from the start. That I was trying, but trying alone wasn't enough. I wanted to speak. I wanted to explain. But I knew how that would go. I had been advised. No interruptions, no defense, no crying too much, and no being too cold. So I stayed, still, quiet, ashamed, burning with humiliation and disappointment. My fingers dug into the edge of the chair. I looked at the children beside me, Arya drawing with a dull crayon, while Luca glared at Derek with narrowed eyes. Then Carlane made a sharp statement. Why should she keep the kids if she can't even take care of them? That sentence echoed in my mind. Why should I keep them? I tried to hold back the tears rising. I knew that on paper, I didn't look impressive. No new clothes, no dance classes, no fancy lunches. But I was the one there every night. I combed their hair, checked under the bed for monsters, and hand-stitched their coats when I couldn't afford new ones. But the court didn't care about that. The court only looked at the numbers, and I didn't have those numbers. The judge looked at me, his eyes full of doubt. He opened his mouth to speak, then I felt a tug on my sleeve again. It was Luca. He whispered, "Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" At first, I didn't understand. "What letter?" I asked, confused. Luca pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and held it up. My stomach tightened. I didn't know what it was, but I could clearly see Derek's posture change. He sat up straight. Carla turned to him, whispering something. For the first time, I saw her waver. "Luca, what is that?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. He looked straight at the judge. "Can I give this to Mom?" he asked. The judge seemed surprised but nodded. "Bring it here." Luca walked over, small but steady, past the shiny suits and curious gazes, then handed the letter to the judge with both hands. The room fell into an eerie silence, heavy with tension. I could see beads of sweat beginning to form on Derek's forehead. Carla whispered again, quickly and low. Her confidence, finally, started to falter. Here's the translation of the text into English. The judge opened the letter. I watched his eyes as he scanned each word. His expression slowly shifted. Confusion, then realization, followed by a deeper intensity. He looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Morrow," he said, "would you like to explain this?" The moment those words left the judge's mouth, the temperature in the courtroom seemed to change. Derek's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Carla quickly leaned toward him, whispering once again, but this time with a hint of urgency in her voice. Whatever was written on that paper, it made it a part of this. I leaned forward, my heart pounding, trying to read the judge's expression. He held the letter with both hands and glanced down again, his brow furrowing. Then he began reading aloud. To Derek Morrow from Elbecker, CPA, subject, Strategic Financial Protection, preparing for coma. Then he stopped and read again, addressing the courtroom before returning his gaze to Derek. This is a letter regarding strategic financial protection from 3 months ago, before you filed for divorce. The document outlines instructions to open an offshore account, transfer assets to Shell LLC, and minimize reported income to influence custody and support proceedings. He continued reading. There was a line that said, "Maintain primary custody if possible, but at the very least, ensure she has little grounds to challenge legally by appearing financially and morally stable." The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. All eyes were now on Derek. Even Carla seemed shocked. She turned back toward him, whispering something that sounded like, "Is this true?" I froze. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed between disbelief and a kind of serene rage with no escape. I had suspected everything. I knew Derek was strategic, cold when it came to money, and ruthless in getting what he wanted. But seeing it written out, hearing the judge read it before my children, was something I never imagined. The judge lowered the letter and neatly placed it on the bench in front of him. He then looked back at Derek and said, "You deliberately deceived this court. You attempted to manipulate the outcome of these proceedings through financial dishonesty. This letter is a direct effort to use wealth and calculated deceit to prevent your children from seeing their mother." Derek stood up, visibly agitated. "That letter is old. We don't need to translate that file. It's not even relevant, Your Honor." He took a step back. The authority in his voice dominated the room. Arya looked up from her drawing and grabbed my hand. I wrapped my arm around her without taking my eyes off the judge. He turned to make a note for me. "Ms. Morrow, did you know about this letter before today?" "No, Your Honor," I replied. "This is the first time I've seen or heard about it." "And did your son find it?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes, he never mentioned it until now." At that moment, Luca looked at me. I thought it might be helpful. "I found it while searching through my dad's desk at home," he added softly. "I didn't want anyone to get in trouble, but I didn't want us to lose either." The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then his voice softened. "You did the right thing, young man," he said. He turned to Carla Dean. "I will review the entire case file and suspend this custody hearing to conduct a formal investigation into Mr. Morrow's financial conduct. While waiting, primary custody will remain with Ms. Morrow, with temporary visitation rights for Mr. Morrow until this matter is resolved." Those words slowly sank in. I heard them, but at first I couldn't respond. It was like I needed a moment to make sure I wasn't imagining them. When they finally settled, I felt my knees shaking. I sat down, pulling both of my children into my lap. Carla Dean stood silently, lips tightly pressed, arms folded. She didn't object. She couldn't. The damage had been done. Derek didn't speak another word. After the judge's ruling, the court clerk moved forward, accepting the settlement resolution. I stayed seated, wrapping my arms around my children as if they were the only thing keeping me grounded. Luca leaned into me and whispered, "Did I mess up?" "No, kiddo," I said. "You saved us." He nodded once and didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I finally understood how a child could have the strength to carry something like that. And I learned something else. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, I actually felt like we had a real chance. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, holding my children's hands, I could barely feel the ground beneath me. My feet moved, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept replaying the judge's words in my head, trying to believe in them. He had suspended the proceedings. He had suspended Derek's custody rights. He had believed me, or at least, He had finally seen the truth for himself. Outside, the air was cold. Luca let go of my hand to zip up Arya's jacket. I looked at him, feeling a deep wave of gratitude that I still couldn't put into words. How do you thank a child for something like that? For standing up and doing something no adult in that courtroom had the courage to do. A few days later, the court ordered an official investigation into Derek's financial activities. I met with an investigator appointed by the court, a woman named Ms. Trent, who listened carefully, took notes, and never once disclosed the cash transactions and tax discrepancies that clearly showed he had been hiding income for years. Each time I received an update, I felt something inside me slowly rebuilding, trusting my memory, trusting my instincts, and believing that maybe, just maybe, justice could exist. For so long, I had been made to feel like I was imagining everything. Derek had convinced everyone, including a part of me, that I was weak, delusional, and powerless. But now, those words didn't matter. There were no smug looks, no fake smiles. The courtroom had changed. The judge walked in and began the hearing with a statement. This court has reviewed the financial investigation into Mr. Morrow and found substantial evidence of intentional non-disclosure, asset concealment, and manipulation of income to gain an advantage in these proceedings. This behavior directly contradicts the best interests of the children involved, Morrow. He paused and looked down at me. Ms. Morrow, considering the findings. The gavel came down. It was real. Arya let out a soft scream and hugged my waist. Luca gripped my hand tightly. He didn't smile, but his eyes shone steadily, confidently. That night, we had pancakes for dinner and danced to the music on the radio. Nothing fancy, just us in our little kitchen, laughing until the sound filled every corner of the apartment. Then, I sat on the floor, holding both kids in my lap. Arya was singing. Luca was drawing something in a notebook. When I looked down, I saw the events of that day in court, but I often think about it. Not just the moment when the judge ruled in my favor or Derek's face, but the quiet strength it took to get there. The kind of strength that doesn't come from power or money, but from love. The kind of strength that continues when everything else is gone. After the ruling, life didn't become perfect. I still worked long hours. I still budgeted each shopping trip down to the last dollar. I still picked up old clothes and trimmed them, not explaining too much to the kids. I only told them what they needed to know. Their father wasn't ready to be consistent, and they deserved people who would show up and stay. They stopped asking after a while. Luca still occasionally talked about the letter. One evening we were sitting on the couch and he asked, "Did you have trouble getting it?" I shook my head and looked him straight in the eye. "No, sweetheart. You were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most." He nodded as if he understood the guilt, the lie that poverty meant I was failing my children, that I had to prove my worth by acting like everything was fine instead of just being honest about how hard it was. The counselor helped me see what I hadn't before. I wasn't weak for struggling. I was strong because I survived. Strong because I kept a roof over our heads. Because I went to court without a lawyer. Because I put my kids first every single day. One weekend, I found a part-time office job with benefits. It was the job of a tree with roots, thick and deep. Beneath it, I wrote one word: grow. That's what we're doing now. Growing. It doesn't always feel fast or easy, but it's stable. Each week, we move a little further from fear and a little closer to peace. Sometimes people ask me how I stay so calm in court, how I didn't break down. The truth is, I almost did. But when you're a mother and your children are teetering on the edge, you find a way to keep breathing, to keep standing. Not because of what I've learned, but because of this. Justice doesn't always come easily, but it can still come. And sometimes when it arrives, it comes in the form of a folded letter in the hands of a little boy, held by silent courage, given with love. That was the day everything changed. Not just in the courtroom, not just legally, but in my heart. That was the day I stopped surviving and started living again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything else seems to fall back into place, thank you for being a part of it.